When you look at the Motorola X, you can't get caught up in the hype that was created by months worth of rumors and leaks. Focus on one thing. Is this a phone worth having? I'm Andrew with mobileburn.com. Here's a Moto X review to help you try to answer that question. Now, from the start, the Moto X has features that seem to put it behind the top of the line Android smartphones of today. For one, its main processor is only a 1.7 GHz dual-core processor. It has a 4.7-inch AMOLED display with only 720p resolution, and the battery is only 2200 milliamps. Now, I say only with emphasis because that's the reason people are upset with the Moto X. This was supposed to be the game-changing, genre-defying, next-level specs, and it didn't happen. Instead, we got a device that had the features that were pretty much commonplace in the last generations of smartphones. And it's understandable to be upset with that, but that's no reason to cast it aside completely. For one, that dual-core processor is a Snapdragon S4 Pro. It keeps pace with some of the quad cores of this generation, and no, it's not as fast, and it shows its shortcomings in certain areas. But when it comes to the main task of app loading and switching between things and navigating the UI, it's mostly lag-free, and it still manages to load and play games without any stuttering or buffering. Aside from that, Motorola actually built its own processor called the X8. So it's not just the Snapdragon that you have going on. There's also two more cores. One is dedicated for hands-free commands, and another is dedicated to contextual features. So it recognizes the speed you're traveling or the position of the phone. These cores are low-powered, and they're purposely designed to minimize the drain on battery life. So it's very efficient and very smart. Now, the presence of the X8 allows you to do some smart things like have always on Google Now. Even if you can't touch your phone physically or the screen isn't on, you can still interact with your device like this. Okay, Google Now, play Daft Punk.
Playing request.
Now, these Google Now commands are possible because the X8 has a dedicated core that's always listening out for your voice and is tuned to you. Aside from that, it has a dedicated core that does a lot of sensors based on the phone state. So if you move at a really fast pace, it picks up and says, hey, he's probably driving. So when you get an incoming text message, it'll read it out loud to you and give you the choice of sending auto reply saying, hey, can't text right now, I'm driving. There's also sensors to get into the camera app. Now, the classic way of getting to the camera app is unlocking the screen, tapping the app, the shortcut. But you can also do it by flicking your wrist really quickly to get directly into the camera app from anywhere, even if the screen is off completely. Now, there's no way to calibrate it, and it has to be a very specific motion. You can't go up and down. You can't just shake it back and forth. It has to be flipping, rotating, front, back, that type of thing in order to get to it. So that's something another feature that you're able to do because of the X8 has that dedicated core picking up on your sensors. Of course, it's not all about sensors. The Moto X is also noteworthy because of its size. Even with that 4.7-inch display that I mentioned earlier, it still has one of the best proportion scenes thanks to its edge-to-edge display. It's not actually edge-to-edge. There is still a bezel, but it's very narrow and barely noticeable, and that's one of the great things about it. Another great thing is that the only physical buttons are the power and volume controls. It uses virtual navigation buttons, so when you look at the bottom, it's easy to get back, home, or multitasking because you always know it's going to be either on your bottom on the portrait or on the bottom in landscape. The best thing about the Moto X, even better than the hand-free controls, is the shape. The phone has large slopes that curve into like a cup-friendly shape. It's a little chunkier at the top at about 10.5 millimeters, but the bottom and the sides taper off very nicely, so it fits very comfortably in your hand. And it's able to do that because of the proportions are so out of whack than what you would expect. With a screen this big, you wouldn't expect the phone to be so small, but it actually feels very nice because of the edge-to-edge display. They were able to pack a lot more into the shape. In terms of the touch, it has a 3-material weave on the back. It's a composite material, and it feels very smooth, retains practically no moisture. Now, depending on the color that you select, the back might feel a little different, like the black or the white version, but they both feel very good. And speaking of color, one of the things that's interesting about the Moto X is later on this year, they're going to give people the option to customize all aspects of it. Unfortunately, it's initially going to be an AT&T exclusive, And Verizon says they're going to do it later this year, but they're not going to be doing it as soon, and it might be a very long wait. But moving on, it has a 4.7-inch display. As I mentioned earlier, it's 720p, which is still good enough for me. The screen size is good, and the quality in terms of brightness is still very good. The one problem I have with the AMOLED screen, it has sort of like a pinkish tone sometimes. When you're in the browser, like I held it side by side next to an ACC one, and it was very apparent that the AMOLED screen was a little more tinted and darker, and it wasn't as full and as true to life as you would like. Aside from that, it has a unique feature called Active Display. The way this works is that instead of having a blinking LED light, which is gonna blink, 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 tell you look at me, it has a screen that blink, blink, blinks and says look at me. So if you get an incoming message, you can just look at it, put your finger down, scroll up, and you can see more details about the actual message. For instance, a Gmail or a Facebook message, maybe a missed phone call, anything that can notify you can be there. And you can change the settings to pick which apps are allowed to work with it. The software on the Moto X is Android 4.2.2, and it's not stock Android. Not entirely. Now in appearance, this looks just like a Nexus or Google Play edition. It runs the same standard Android apps made directly by Google, like Calendar, the People app, the Dialer, all of the stock Android in terms of appearance, it's just the same. But it's not running Android 4.3, obviously. So it might be a semantics issue, but in terms of the overall experience, you're mostly getting a stock experience. However, that doesn't mean Motorola stays completely true to its Google overlords. The camera app is unique because they dumped all of the on-screen controls that you see in some other camera apps. It doesn't let you adjust white balance or exposure, sadly, but overall it's designed to just open the app, tap on the screen, and take a picture. That's what it's meant to do, and that's pretty much the only thing it can do. Now, it doesn't even have, what's the thing called again? Photospheres, yeah. The 3D panoramas, it doesn't have that. It just has the standard panoramas. Other things you can do HDR, you can put location and metadata in there, you can just swipe to the right to change the settings, or you can swipe up and down to zoom in and out of something. But like I said, this is not the stock camera application. It is different, and it does show where Motorola is inserting their own little flavor. While we're on the subject of cameras, the Moto X has a 2-megapixel front-facing camera. That's very nice. It shoots in full HD video, and it looks very good quality when you're doing video chats or self-portraits. The back camera, that's a little bit more of a mixed bag. Now the camera has what's called a clear pixel sensor. It's designed to capture a lot more light, so you'd think in a low light situation it would be a lot better. But they run into problems because Motorola's correction is way too aggressive. So the photos take on this wavy looking thing. The photos are way too soft. They lack sharpness and detail, and when you zoom in on them, you can really see what I'm talking about. It creates some problems. There's some times when the photos look really good, I have no complaints, but there are other times when I just look at it and say, what went wrong here? I don't understand it. And the Moto X is a lot better than what Motorola typically does with cameras, but it's not a lot better than the competition. And that's something that pretty much sums up the overall experience of using Moto X. It's not better than the competition. Now, I implore people not to immediately write off the Moto X because you say, oh, it doesn't have the specs I wanted. I wanted 1080p quad core and I wanted to make me a sandwich. That's not what a phone is about. It's not just a bunch of numbers on the page. Overall, this phone is more than good enough for most people. It's a lot faster and a lot stable than what people would consider mid-range. So everyone out there saying this is just a mid-range phone, you're dead wrong. Now, but if I'm being honest, I wouldn't say this offers anything particularly better than the other devices out there, except for its shape and its personalization options, which is an exclusive to AT&T, which kind of defeats the point. I love the palm-fitting pocket friendliness of the Moto X, and I love the fact that they accomplish all of this while still having a large display. And I also love the OK Google controls, but the one problem with that is it's unique to Motorola, but not unique to the Moto X. If you're on Verizon, you can get the same features in the Droid Ultra or the Droid Max, which is going to have a bigger screen and a lot better battery. Now, of course, if those things appeal to you and you're not on Verizon, the Moto X is the only way to get those features, for now at least, so I kind of understand the appeal. Personally, I think the Moto X isn't a spec beast, but it's a solid phone with a modest but ideal form factor. It's the perfect size phone, and I wish that we can get more big screens without having to have gigantic phones. But at the same time, at $199, it might be priced just a little too high, considering that there's more powerful hardware out there at the same price point. Judging by the phone in a vacuum, it's worth the money. But if you're judging by comparison, it might be some other worthy options out there for you. I'd recommend the Moto X as someone who wants a phone that's more comfortable to hold and still capable of handling above average demands. It has solid battery life, a good screen, and a lot of stock Android features, or stock-ish Android features. It's not the dream phone everyone wanted to see, but it's still a good phone in the reality that we have. This is Andrew from mobileburn.com reviewing the Moto X, available in August or September for AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, and US Cellular. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.